child snatching is the first stage. And please make the distinction between custody cases where mom and dad fight over their kids and what I call institutionalized child snatching, where the local authority goes for your kid, whether you like it and realize it or not. And that's what makes me angry. This is all only possible because of the secrecy of the UK family courts. That leads to forced adoptions. And that was the issue I took to Brussels 2 years ago. Since then, I've had to discover what I didn't want to know about, and even more, the fifth issue. That has to be put on the agenda because it's a new kind of a crime with multiple perpetrators and multiple victims, I am sorry to say. Child snatching is the term that Christopher Booker coined. He has been writing for The Telegraph on a very regular basis, 14 articles on what was until then the worst of all child snatching cases. The Nigerian family whose 7 children were taken, 2 of them adopted, and they sent to prison and deported. In terms of mainstream media, I'm only aware of these 2 films that I keep quoting to kind of justify that I'm not crazy and I'm not making it up. The secret family courts are at the core, as Ian Josephs also said. This pretext of protecting the identity of the child is just part of an institutionalized hypocrisy that I find really too terrible to bear. I started a petition which a lady in Wales had started in the streets. In 2011, there are now over 2,000 signatures and over 45,000 views, I think. But the real thing are the stats that Len Lawrence showed this morning also, because I just happened to stumble into them, official government statistics, and I turned them into this pretty picture to show that and how the trend has been rising since 1994. Now, Len Lawrence pointed out to the discontinuity and related it to this character at the Court of Protection. Somebody else suggested, no, that was the time when there was the financial crisis, when people were running out of money, so they had to invent children as new commodity. You make up your own mind, okay? What is the kink? But the fact is very visible, the trend is rising. Onwards and upwards, more and more children to be taken. 1,000 a month isn't enough. So the 5th of November was picked as the date because that's when 8 MEPs came to London for a fact-finding visit that not only those 30 parents who had accompanied me to Brussels were waiting for, but lots and lots of more people. Accompanied by Jude Curtin-Darling, the only MEP from the UK. She is Labour. She is worth contacting together with her colleague Paul Brannan. And at long last, they now produced this report, this 15-page report, which I only skim-read so far, but it is a critical tool for fighting what is wrong in the UK. So far, I've always been quoting Ian Josephs, his 5 points, what's unique in the UK. Now we have more to go by. Once this will be available online, you'll just need to click through. In this report, Sir James Munby, the president of the Family Division, who was beautifully criticized by Len Lawrence this morning as well, says we should not be protecting public officials, social workers, experts, judges from criticism, even if it's very strong and blunt. Go for it. But of course, it doesn't make any difference because any judge can do whatever they like to you. That's the problem. So therefore, I would not necessarily advise you to go for it. Everything is always up to the individual discretion of the judge. It doesn't matter what Sir James says.
What if you have evidence, like recordings?
Who cares? They do what they can because they can. That is my observation after far too many cases I wish I had known about. There is no justice. John Hemming told me it's policy. He told me there is no accountability. Sorry. An interesting challenge, Sir James has said, nobody has ever succeeded in persuading either the Human Rights Court Strasbourg or the EU Court of Justice that our domestic adoption law is not compliant with both the Convention and the Charter. So that made me think, where and how is the secrecy enshrined? Or is it just the court clerks putting up the signs in chambers, private, nobody admitted? So that's worth exploring. I haven't looked at the Children Act in detail yet. Forced adoption was the suggestion that Florence Bellone made because she had taken the issue to 2 MEPs in Brussels and came back to me saying, that's what we need to do, a petition to the Petitions Committee in Brussels on the topic of forced adoptions. Child snatching sounds too threatening, but forced adoptions. Well, when I got to Brussels and talked to MEPs, I said, what is a forced adoption? So I had to define it and put these 3 points out, which I checked with Ian today. To petition the EU Parliament is not a trivial exercise. Florence had told me I must have at least 2,000 signatures in order to get onto the agenda of the Petitions Committee. Well, now we have 5,700 signatures, but I also tried 2 other platforms, so 1,700 signatures are sitting on another platform, Avaz. Lots of people think Avaz is the best there is. Unfortunately, it isn't. Change.org is better because you can update the people whom you're signing, so that is very much worth doing. I made 3 presentations in Brussels. As I say, the first 6 minutes of passion in March 2014, and then there was an MEP election, so therefore the members of the committee, of the Petitions Committee, were also newly elected, or some of them, a lot of them. I was therefore invited again in November, and then there was a Bulgarian mother whom I happened to have assisted before, who also all of a sudden was invited to make her presentation. And that was interesting because we literally mobilized Bulgaria. None of the Bulgarian MEPs could have imagined and envisaged that this could happen in what is called a democracy in a Western country. So they went as far as discussing, debating whether the Bulgarian population needs to be informed. If you want to go to the UK, you are risking losing your children, so you better consider that move. I'm not sure whether that eventually was ever published, but it certainly was being discussed. But through these persistent petitions, and the UK had only produced about 22 at the time, whereas Germany 225 roughly, the MEPs came and a new title was invented, and I changed therefore the title also to this EU title, i.e. to protect the best interest of the child across borders, because God forbid we can't just point the finger at the UK. No, we have to harmonize across EU countries. And now it is actually quite an interesting challenge, if you like, to compare which country is the worst. But that's...
I was just chuckling at that, so it wasn't an insult.
Okay. So for my current understanding and analysis, and I call this my gradual shock therapy that I've been going through and that I have to kind of put everybody else through in my wake, so to speak. We're up against not only the UK government, but also the EU Commission. If you remember my video at the first time, I said I am very, very tempted to respond to the Commission because I was shocked. I still am shocked every time I hear anybody from the Commission respond to anybody from the Petitions Committee. But Change.org is a smart platform. we can, or if you start your own petition, you can add the recipient for your petition. So I just kept varying and changing. And I've had the Minister of State for Europe as a recipient, and now I changed to Franz Timmermans, because last Tuesday, Belinda and Dave and I went to Brussels. And we heard Franz Timmermans speak. This was the second time. Last year, I had to travel from Berlin to go there and to hand him a folder. And he said, I'll get back to you, which he didn't. And then I looked him up. He is much more popular and much more active on Facebook and Twitter than is his UK colleague. So you'll enjoy maybe following him. I don't really want to talk too much about this fourth issue that we identified, but we could have or should have had Brian Peat here as a speaker as well. He is not only an abuse survivor, i.e. he fits this category and bill, he is also a whistleblower and thus the victim of 3 police forces. I mean, I'm only a victim of 1. It doesn't really count compared to other cases I know. And he has been acting as a Mackenzie friend. And maybe some of you now know that Mackenzie friends are not just Belinda's friends, but that they are people who have a certain legal status in UK courts. And it's a critical branding issue now because there's a consultation out about Mackenzie friends. The suggestion is to call them court supporters when really they ought to be supporting the litigants in person who don't have legal presentation. And I can assure you, in family courts, it's virtually guaranteed that you don't get legal representation that works in your interest. At least that's our experience. So amongst the 70 websites and petition sites that I keep producing and sort of look after, this one on the National Inquiry has been a bit of a pet of mine because it just happened to be coincidental that we picked up Brian from prison, and when the National Inquiry, the official version was launched, and I gave Brian Peat's book to the assistant of the woman called Wolf and the select committee. And of course, I suppose it didn't make any difference either, but at least, you know, we just have to keep trying. Well, now comes the elephant in the room. As I said, we must think of, and it's actually not my idea, to think of a new crime category. That was Tim Tate. He was part of the team who produced the Cook Report. 25 years ago, his book was published. And in that book, he comes up with a number of recommendations and proposals. And one of them is to set up a royal commission. That was then my latest petition, and we've just hit over 200 signatures. And that to me was the limit before I start talking to the cabinet about it. But besides his book that was written 25 years ago, the 8-page report entitled Satanist Ritual Abuse of Children is a very interesting find and discovery by Debbie, who has been incredibly active on video and in courts. This report was produced in 2012 when the Office of the Children's Commissioner made a national inquiry into the problems surrounding children in foster care and being abused. It has a very clear recommendation that court, legal, and police procedures need to be urgently reviewed. But guess what? Everything has been destroyed. There are no records, and that is in line with some policy of data, this, that, or the other. So we need to act not only on the UK level, but also on the EU level and also the UN level. But on the UK level, we did get John Hemming to what's called bagging a petition in 2013 after a 10-day demo outside Downing Street. Children placed in foster care was that title. Nobody did anything about it. That's sort of one of the reasons why I felt I had to go to the EU as well. But then Debbie wrote this incredible report about the discrepancies between the EU Directive 2011/92 and UK family courts. That's where I am still waiting for an answer from the EU Commission. And that's where I take Mr. Timmermans by his word, because he is now the special commissioner for the Petitions Committee. On the UN level, Debbie again has found this incredible report criticizing the UK government. The UK government was criticized by the EU with an infringement notice where the government had violated this particular directive, but we can't get disclosure. So it's the same circus, different clowns, right? Whether it's London or whether it's Brussels. I always compare the Commission in Brussels to Whitehall in London. These are the civil servants. They are not elected, and this is quite critical to appreciate the difference between the elected politicians who talk and meet in Parliament and who are as genuinely as possible on the side of citizens, but that's distinctly not the case when we're talking civil servants. Often, media articles seem to count more than UN reports, and this is, after all, quite a stunning title, How London Became the Child Abuse Capital of the World. So in this process of operating on these levels, we as Mackenzie Friends had to felt like we had to reincarnate or pre-incarnate as Mackenzie Angels last year on the occasion of the meeting at the Teatro Technis. We got a blog, we got a YouTube channel, but now we've got news since we were in Brussels on Tuesday, and I've got the first 3 posts up about what happened in Brussels because the topic is on the agenda of the EU Parliament on Wednesday night between 7 and 8. Now, if that is not an achievement 2 years after I went there, then thank you very much indeed. Thank you. This Wednesday, first the Parliament and then the Council. The Parliament consists of 751 MEPs. The Council of the ministers of the 28 member states. So go and look up mcnews.wordpress.com. We haven't had the time to decide on a proper domain name yet, but this too will come.